The first thing we see is Merlin, as he stands on a cliff by the beach, overlooking the expanse of the rolling sea, and he has a pensive look on his face. After a moment, we then see as Arthur approaches from behind, and as he nears, Merlin begins to speak. It looks infinite, doesn't it? Seeing it like this, it's difficult to believe it has an end. And Arthur then takes his place at Merlin's side. Every beginning has an end, Merlin. Even if it's beyond sight. It will be a challenge to maneuver our soldiers over these cliffs. You are certain this is the best place to make our stand? I am. Well, the tide is coming. We should head back. We'll need time to rally the men. And Arthur then starts down the cliff. And after a moment, Merlin follows him. We then go to Crystallum Castle, and we see as Elaine sits at the head of the table and stares ahead, an empty look in her eyes. The Desir have dismissed her, and she has no orders to follow, or disobey. She has no purpose. Nothing. And she does not stir as Lord Vortigern, Lord Maligent and Lady Lordine then enter. My lady, Lord Vortigern begins to say, times are troubled as of late, and he awaits a response. But Elaine does not acknowledge him. In light of recent events, it would seem destiny has turned against us. Well, Elaine begins to say, I suppose so. Given that I have been forsaken by the triple goddess and cut off from the Desir, Mordred has abandoned our cause and rendered all my work useless. Not to mention my sister is intent on stealing the throne. And, even now, Emrys and Arthur live. Yes, you could say that destiny has turned against us. My lady, Lady Lordine then cuts in. That may be how it seems, but hope remains. If we fulfill the goddess's wishes, perhaps you can regain her favour. How do you suggest I do that? When Mordred is too spineless to play his part. What if we knew how to rekindle his desire? Lord Maligent then asks. And Elaine pauses, and her eyes narrow at them. How? Never mind how. If we can convince Mordred to fulfill his destiny, do we have your word that you'll keep the judgment at bay? And Elaine pauses for a moment, before responding. You have my word. We then go back to the sanctuary, and we see that it's alive with activity and chatter, as the subjects make ready for war. In the armoury, weapons are sharpened and armour is fitted, and on the sanctuary grounds, Arthur's soldiers practice with swords, maces, bows and arrows, knife throwing. They're doing everything they can to prepare. And we then go to the Great Hall, and we see Merlin and Arthur march side by side. As soon as everything is in order, Arthur begins to say, we'll head out. When Elaine sees our army leaving the sanctuary, she'll get the message. I'll ensure not a single man or woman stands idle, Merlin says. Why? So you don't have to do any of the work? Exactly. And as Merlin then walks on ahead, Arthur calls after him. Merlin! And Merlin then stops to face him. What happens tomorrow will change everything. I know. So we're going to be ready for it. And he and Arthur then exchange a nod, and Merlin continues forward. We then see Gwen, who moves through the armory, overseeing subjects and soldiers. "Swords need to be sharpened," she begins to say. "Spears as well. Get more servants down here to help the soldiers with their armour. Let's get moving!" As we then go to the hallway, we see Lancelot, Gwen, Percival and Elaine stride down the hall with purpose, but they have not yet donned their battle garments. "This will be the first battle we've fought without Leon," Elaine says. "Then we'd better make him proud," Percival replies. And as we then go back to Merlin, we see him in his chambers as he packs choice belongings in his bag, and his eyes then land on the wooden dragon his father carved for him. And he slows, and he picks it up and studies it for a moment, before eventually tucking it away in his bag. And as we then go back to the armory, we see as Gwen and the knights suit up for battle, and Percival and Elaine assist one another. But from across the room, Lancelot watches Gwen tighten her vambraces, and perceiving Lancelot's gaze, Gwen nudges him with a knowing smile. "I can see things haven't changed for you," he says to him, but Lancelot busies himself with his armour. "I do not know what you mean. Every man falls in love with Guinevere at some point, even if it's only for a moment." And after a second, Lancelot finds his gaze drawn back to Gwen. "What am I next to two kings?" he says to Gwen. "There is nothing I could give her that Arthur could not provide 100 times over. Maybe it isn't material things she's after." And as Lancelot's stare then finds its way back to Gwen, she happens to lock eyes with him, and Lancelot smiles, pondering over Gwen's words, and Gwen gives a gentle smile of her own. We then go back to Crystallum Castle, and we see Morgana as she pushes open the door to Mordred's chambers, and she sees him, sitting on a chair with his eyes closed. "I missed you at breakfast," Morgana says to him, and his eyes then open at the sound of her voice. "I had not the appetite." And Morgana then approaches and slides to the floor at his feet, and she studies his face with concern. "Are you well, Mordred? What would you say if I told you my desire to kill Arthur has been shaken?" And Morgana stares. She must tread carefully. He cannot know of her allegiances just yet. "I would ask if you had lost your head. Perhaps I have. I wish I was as certain of my beliefs as you are, Morgana. But ever since what I did to Galahad, an accident," Morgana then replies in a pained tone, "for which I have forgiven you. Nevertheless, I have questioned whether we are truly doing what is best for our people. Perhaps we are wrong. Perhaps war is not the answer." And pitying him, Morgana studies his face. "I want you to have something." And from one of her pockets, Morgana then draws out Galahad's toy soldier, the one with the red cross. "This was Gally's." "No, Morgana. I couldn't. Please. You so remind me of him." "Morgana." But Morgana then takes Mordred's hands and places the toy soldier in them, and she closes his fingers around it. And Mordred studies the toy for a moment, before looking back at her. "If you asked me to go with you now, I would. There is nothing for me here. Lead. And this time, I will follow you." But Morgana can't bear it. She has to be honest with him. "Oh, Mordred," she begins to say, as she touches his face. I feel I am to blame for what's become of you. I must confess something." But suddenly, Lady Lordine opens the door and enters. "Mordred, we wish to speak with you." And after a moment, we then see as Mordred storms down the corridor, followed by Lady Lordine, Lord Vortigern, and Lord Maligent. "So," Mordred begins to say, "I am to follow you down to the Crystal Cave, and do exactly as you say, with no explanation whatsoever?" "Mordred," Lord Maligent replies, "your compliance is vital. Your followers are disappointed with your inactivity. They begin to lose faith." But out of nowhere, Mordred then seizes Lord Maligent by the throat and shoves him up against the wall, and Lord Vortigern and Lady Lordine watch, startled. "I have done everything you have asked," Mordred exclaims. "What more could you possibly want from me? The only reason I agreed to this was to avenge my people and the women I loved." And Lord Maligent then swallows his fears and gets a hold of himself. "Then, would you not like to see her again?" And the light in Mordred's eyes change immediately as he realises what Lord Maligent is saying. We then go back to the sanctuary, and all are suited up for battle, and we then see Merlin, Arthur, Gwen, the knights and a few subjects and soldiers mount their horses. This is a pivotal moment for all of them. "Let's move out," Arthur calls out, and his army then does so, and their shields and spears glint in the sunlight, and banners bearing the Pendragon crest flap in the wind. Whatever fortune may bring, they are ready to face their foes. We then go back to Crystallum Castle, in the Crystal Cave, and the icy blue glow from the crystals fills the cavern, as Lord Maligent, Lord Vortigern, Lady Lordine, and Mordred then enter. "You said I could see her," Mordred begins to say, eager and frantic. "You said she was here. Where is she?" "Patience, Mordred," Lady Lordine replies, and she then nods to the other two lords, and they come forward, and the lords and lady take hands and form a semicircle before Mordred. "Alisan gast flam diap," they all begin to say. "Leia dan he toward the pathway through. Tinan he back to Duaknisi. Bringan anlik wea." And the three sorcerers then open their eyes, and they flash gold. And Mordred scans the cave, eager, timid, when "Mordred." And Mordred stops. Can it be? Slowly he turns around, and across from him stands dear Kara, a look of pity on her soft face, and she is deathly pale, with an unnatural glow about her skin. "Kara? How?" And the lords and Lady Lordine then retreat to give Mordred and Kara some privacy. "Kara," Mordred says once again, as he then runs over to her and throws his arms around her, and she returns the embrace in full. "I've missed you," Kara says to him. "I've missed you so much, Mordred." And they then pull back, and Mordred cups his hands around her face, studying it, taking her in. Are you real? This must be an illusion. How can this be?" "No, it's me, Mordred. I'm here." And Mordred then frantically kisses her face, cheeks, nose, eyelids, everywhere he can, and Kara tries to talk while he does this, occasionally returning his kisses. Mordred, such a breach of this veil between life and death cannot be sustained for long. We haven't much time. And Mordred then pauses to behold her, with tears of joy easing down his face, and Kara presses tender kisses to his hands. The gods are indeed merciful to grant me this moment with you, Mordred says, gazing heavenward. Kara, I am so sorry. I should have saved you. You did everything you could, Mordred. It is not you who is responsible for my death. And Kara then pulls him into another embrace, kissing the side of his head, and her loving demeanour then changes into sugar-coated bitterness. It is Arthur. And Mordred then pulls back. The sorrow in his eyes shifts as he takes this in, and conflicting loyalties fight for dominance inside him. Kara, I believe Merlin has changed. Perhaps there is even still goodness in Arthur. Arthur! He ordered I hang for what I am, for what you are. Do you know what it's like to hang, Mordred? To feel your neck breaking like a twig, and Mordred flinches, wavering. Mordred, I have known great peace, just to watch you avenge our kind. Only you can restore justice to the world. Is it justice? Do you forget? This is the man who uses magic for his own gain one day, only to slaughter our people the next. Have you forgotten the screams of those condemned to the pyre for the gifts they didn't choose? Have you forgotten that innocent blood that stained the headsman's axe? Or the compassion your merciful king showed when you begged for my life? And her words start to take effect, and they tug all the right strings, rousing his love for his people, and the hate of that tyrant. And just like Lady Macbeth, she strokes his face with such love, whilst filling his ears with her poison. He gives no second chances, Mordred. If he stole back the crown, the persecution would only resume. Arthur Pendragon must pay. Tell me you will not fail me now. Tell me, Mordred. And Mordred thinks. It is his responsibility to avenge his people, isn't it? His responsibility to fight back against all the genocide. And Mordred gazes at her and considers, and then he sets his jaw, determined. I will not fail you, Kara. Not again. I swear it. And Kara smiles, relieved. I believe you. And Mordred sighs, and he touches her face. How he yearns for her to stay, and he leans closer and gives her a long, gentle kiss. And once their lips break away, Kara steps backwards, whilst Mordred's eyes are still closed. And when they eventually reopen, Kara is gone. But it doesn't matter. The damage is done. And Mordred stares ahead, dark and determined. He has been left with a burning new resolve, to either end this war with fire, or go up in smoke with it. We then go to the beach, where we see tents are pitched, and horses tethered, and supplies are organised. And in the command tent, at the head of the table, Arthur hovers over maps depicting their seaside location, and Gwen stands at his left, and Merlin at his right, and the knights and several other soldiers surround the table. The knights will be positioned here, Arthur begins to say, where they can best defend our vanguard. With luck, we'll be able to hold off the enemy until further help arrives. Exactly what form will this help take? Lancelot then asks, and Arthur, Merlin and Gwen exchange uncertain glances. We don't know, and the knights and soldiers look rather sceptical. But Merlin did say, Gwen then cuts in, that his vision promised we'd receive aid if we fought by the sea. Just by the sea, Percival then says. That's not very specific, and several of them then look to Merlin, who feels a bit awkward and at a loss. So, Gwen then begins to say, our plan, for the biggest battle of our time, is to stake out in unfamiliar terrain, provoke our enemy into fighting, and just wait for something to show up and help us. But we're not even sure what it is. Look, Arthur then exclaims, if Merlin trusts it, so do I. And I, Gwen then says, but the knights and Arthur's soldiers remain unconvinced, and Merlin gives a weak smile. If only he completely trusted it. We then go back to Crystalline Castle, in Elaine's chambers, and we see Morgana and Elaine, who sit at a table, with tea set out before them, and they stir their tea, and sip, and stir again, and then they repeat that. They carry on like this for a moment, silently loathing each other's company. What did the lords want with Mordred? Morgana then asks. That is none of your concern, Elaine replies. I am queen, sister. Anything concerning Mordred concerns me. You are not queen yet, sister. And there's then a moment of silence, and Morgana then sets her teacup down and reclines. May I ask you something? If you must. And Morgana then waits a second, and begins to study Elaine. What is the circle of fate? And Elaine's spoon clatters, and she clears her throat, and attempts to recover. A rather telling reaction. Where did you hear that? Someone mentioned it. You have not spoken of this to Mordred, have you? Why does it matter? Under no circumstances are you to bring this up to anyone ever again. Is that understood? I don't take orders from you. But suddenly, Mordred then throws open the doors, followed by the Lords and Lady Lordine. Elaine, Mordred then calls out. I have seen Arthur and his army in the crystals. They have set up camp by the sea. They are ready to face us. What? Morgana then says, alarmed. Now! And Elaine then looks to Mordred with a smile. The lords and lady have succeeded. His desire for revenge has been reawakened. And Morgana stares at him. Since when was he so motivated? And we are ready to face them, Elaine says. And she then turns to Lord Vortigern. The time has come, Lord Vortigern. Prepare the men for battle. And anxious, Morgana glances between her smirking adversaries. Merlin and Arthur better know what they're doing. We then go back to the beach, at sunset, and a peach hue fills the sky. And we see Gwen, as she strolls down the beach barefoot to the ocean, leaving a trail of footprints in her wake. And in her hands, she bears the crown she received on the day of her coronation. And she stops, ankle deep in water, and gazes out over the horizon and as she closes her eyes, Leon's final words echo in her head. One day, you will find happiness that does not flee from you. Your suffering will be explained, your troubles laid to rest. You will know the peace your pain has earned. And Gwen's eyes then open, and swinging her arm back, she tosses the crown out into the ocean, and watches as it sinks beneath the waves. Down goes the crown and the suffering it brought, and relief and acceptance fill her eyes. In the command tent, we see Arthur as he studies a map at his table, as Gwen then enters. Guinevere, Arthur says, as he sets the map down and rises. I need to speak with you, Gwen says, and from the serious expression on her face, Arthur knows what's coming, and there is a mutual understanding in their gazes. But for a moment, neither is sure how to proceed. A lot has happened these past weeks, hasn't it? And Arthur nods. It really is amazing when you think about how far we've come from where we started. We were so well matched then, Arthur says with a bittersweet smile. Weren't we? Where did we go wrong? I don't think wrong or right have anything to do with it. Once upon a time, there was you and me, and it was a beautiful time, and I will never regret a second of it. But things have changed, Arthur cuts in, clearly helping her out. I've changed. I think you have too. And Gwen then nods. The throne is still yours, Arthur says, if you want it. No, thank you. I have never suffered more than when I was queen. I know now that I don't need a title to make a difference in this world. And Gwen steps forward and takes his hand, tears in her eyes. I would not be who I am today, if not for you. And they gaze at each other, taking in the gravity of their decision on what this will mean for them. And Arthur leans forward and kisses her on the cheek, and Gwen closes her eyes, taking it in just as she did the first time he kissed her, by the window in her little village house, when times were simpler. And Arthur then pulls back slightly, beholding her. For every kiss we've shared, rule we've broken, and evil we've conquered. Thank you, Guinevere. And Gwen smiles tearfully. She gives Arthur's hand a squeeze and lets it go. And breathing deeply, she leaves the tent. And Arthur watches after her, and he exhales, almost relieved. He knows it's better this way. As we then see the streets of London, we see that they are packed with enemy soldiers, and civilians, who remember Elaine from the Old Bailey, watch as she and her enemy soldiers march through the streets, and the lords Lady Lordine, Morgana, and a very determined Mordred take the lead beside a blindfolded Elaine, and civilians back away to avoid drawing attention to themselves. As we then go back to the beach, we see Gwen, Lancelot, Percival, Elaine and Merlin gaze over the ocean, and Gwen tosses out a stone and watches it, as it gets swallowed by the waves. No doubt Elaine has gotten the message and left by now, Gwen says. We should send a scout to make an estimation of her army, Lancelot replies. But we then see Elaine glance at Merlin. "I don't think that will be necessary." "Why not?" Percival asks. "Because we have Merlin." And the four knights then stare at Merlin, and looking up, Merlin glances between them. "Fine," he says, as he then turns to leave. "I'll go and scout the area to evaluate her army." But Lancelot then grabs Merlin by the arm to stop him. "No, Merlin. Just use magic." And Merlin pauses. "Oh, right. You know," Gwen begins to say, "for the most powerful sorcerer ever to walk the earth, you tend to be rather forgetful." And Merlin spares a smirk, but then mustering up his concentration, he channels his magic sight. We then see as Merlin's magic sight travels across the beach to the surrounding forest, and it then zooms past the forest, the motorway and the neighbourhoods, until it breaks into London City, where it soars over rooftops. And finally, his magic sight slows when he finds Elaine and the enemy army in the streets, and it lingers on the front of the army where Elaine, Mordred and Morgana ride. And Merlin's magic sight then rises to scan the army behind them, and it reveals that Elaine leads an unbelievable multitude of enemy soldiers. And Merlin's eyes then shoot open, and he takes a breath, and he finds himself staring ahead once more, surrounded by the knights who look on as they wait for him to report what he has learned. "What did you see?" Lancelot then asks him, and it's clear that Merlin is filled with dread. "If wars were won by numbers alone, we wouldn't stand a chance." As we then go to Arthur's tent, we see the knights and Merlin, who have relayed what they have learned to Arthur. "When do you think they will arrive?" Arthur asks. "By dawn tomorrow," Merlin replies. "We are severely outnumbered," Arthur says, but he then gets an idea, and he turns to the knights. "Ride out into the city, and recruit as many people as you can. We need all the help we can get." "I doubt any civilians would agree to fight for a man they don't believe exists," Elaine replies. "Actually," Lancelot begins to say, "it is not so far-fetched. After witnessing the worldwide loss of electricity, the Lord's display of magic, and a phenomena in the sky, I think they will be open to rallying under a new leader. Someone to guide them through these strange times." "And from what I hear," Percival then cuts in, "a fight broke out in Buckingham Palace. No one knows who's in power anymore. The people need someone to follow." But we then see Merlin shaking his head. "They're scared. I don't think they'd want to get involved. Besides, they know nothing of our kind of warfare. Guns are useless against sorcerers." "They won't need guns," Gwen says. "We can equip them with the magic artifacts we procured from Camelot." "Merlin," Arthur then says as he turns to him, "you are the man who assured me of your faith in mankind. You said all they needed was to be roused. Do you still believe that?" And Merlin then pauses, as he considers it. "Yes." "Then it's settled," Gwen then says. "We'll ride out to the city, and see if we can round up some reinforcements." We then go to the countryside, where we see Elaine and her army march forward, when suddenly, an enemy soldier directs his horse close to Elaine's. "My lady," the soldier begins to say, clearly fearful, "would it not be wise to stop and rest? The men will tire." "You would dare question me," Elaine then says, cutting him off. No, my lady." "Back in line." and the soldier then steers his horse away, shaken. And from alongside, we see that Mordred and Morgana have been observing this interaction with a look of curious concern. "They're terrified of her," Morgana says. "That's why they serve you." But Mordred's gaze is locked ahead. He has single-minded determination. "They serve because they are loyal to me." Loyalty bought by fear is readily sold again when a better price is offered. Elaine controls you with a similar tactic. "I am my own man." When we spoke this morning, that was true. But now, I'm not so sure. "What happened, Mordred?" "I was reawakened. Or put to sleep." "Open your eyes, Mordred. Elaine is manipulating you. Just as I did for the Battle of Camlan. You are nothing to her." And riled, Mordred pulls his horse to a sudden stop and turns on Morgana, and his dark expression, paired with his scarred face, makes him look more intimidating than ever before. "I've heard enough of this, Morgana. Whatever qualms we may have against Elaine, she is only following the commands of the Triple Goddess. She would not betray me." "Is that so? Well, if she is as reliable as you claim, ask her what the Circle of Fate is." "Why? What is it?" But Morgana doesn't respond. The seed of doubt has been planted, and Morgana still holds her place as Queen of Manipulation. And she then clicks her tongue and rides on ahead, and Mordred lingers behind, and we can clearly see an uncertainty gnaw at him as he considers her words. We then go to Gwen, who we see exiting her tent, strapping a sword to her belt, and as she then mounts her horse, two of Arthur's soldiers then notice her. "My lady," one of the soldiers then begins to say, "where are you going?" "Someone needs to thin our enemies' numbers while we have the chance," Gwen replies. "That someone might as well be me. I shall be back before dawn." "Your Highness," the other soldier then says, "send one of us in your steed. Our queen is too valuable. This is something I must do, and I am no longer your queen." And we see the two soldiers are taken aback at this. "I've set aside my burdens of the crown to serve my people in a different way." And Gwen then kicks off and rides out of camp. As we then go to Arthur's tent, we see Merlin sitting on a bench, sharpening Arthur's sword. And suddenly, Arthur then appears and drops something on the table with a heavy thump, and Merlin jumps, and he takes a moment to register what it is. 2 gauntlets, a breastplate. It's a shining suit of armour. "What's this for?" Merlin asks. "You," Arthur replies, and he taps the breastplate, looking proud. And as Merlin then pays more attention to the armour, he realises an amber dragon has been skillfully embedded into the breastplate. "I thought it was about time to get you something to wear when we go on all of our reckless adventures. Especially after what almost happened yesterday. It's magnificent." "Thank you." "What did happen yesterday? I thought we'd proven no one but Mordred is allowed to kill us." "I'm not sure. But you said the great dragon told you the Desir will kill Elaine once this is all over." And Merlin begins to nod. "As punishment for her disobedience. After the way those guards reacted, it makes me wonder what would happen if Mordred isn't the one to kill us. It must be a fate worse than death." I dread to think what it may be. And we then see as Arthur gets an idea. Would it help if you enchanted more flowers to heal the wounded? But Merlin shakes his head. The spell drains some of my deepest magic. It will be some time before I can perform it again. And Arthur then nods, clearly disappointed. We then go to London City, and led by Lancelot, we see the 4 knights ride their horses through the streets, and civilians look up. Their curiosity turns to fear at the sight of more strangely dressed newcomers, as their run-in with Elaine has left them wary. And as the nights pass, some civilians usher each other into buildings or down the street to get away. "Wait!" Percival calls out. "Don't be afraid!" But his words only make them try to escape all the more. And Lancelot then sends a hand signal to his fellow knights, and the 4 of them then direct their horses in the paths of every escape route on the intersection, cutting the civilians off. "Do not be alarmed," Lancelot begins to say. "We have come on behalf of the once and future king." And the civilians stare up at him. Their fears are not gone, to say the least. "Tomorrow," Lancelot continues, "a great battle is to take place, the likes of which you have never seen. The fate of Albion rests in the balance, and we have come to ask for your help." And Lancelot's words have no effect on the civilians, and he's unsure how to proceed. "This purple prose isn't going to get us anywhere," Gwen murmurs to himself, and he then dismounts and climbs up on top of a car. "A moment of your time, please," he begins to say to the civilians. "My name is Sir Gwen, and these are my mates. We're soldiers. You may have seen us around here before, helping out after the blackout." And Gwen then scans the crowd, and he singles out someone in particular, a middle-aged man. "Yeah, I helped you get your wife out of that tube accident. Remember?" And after a moment, the middle-aged man nods, and Gwen nods with him. "Right, so you know us. We're on your side. Now, those crazy blokes who levitated people and rounded you up into the courthouse, they're our enemies, your enemies. Well, tomorrow, they're going to fight Arthur, the man who saved you that day. I know your first reaction is going to be, what the hell does this have to do with me? Well, the answer is everything. Because if Arthur loses this battle, our enemy's next target is you. Your homes, your friends, your families. And we see as fear heightens among the civilians. Look, I'm with you in thinking these past few weeks have been completely mental. But after everything you saw on the telly, everything, even the world around us screaming that King Arthur has returned, maybe it's not as mental as you think. What happens tomorrow will dictate everything that follows. And we need your help. Now that doesn't mean you have to fight with us. We'll need help tending the wounded, or basically anything you have to offer. Because if we lose this war, you do too. And the civilians then take this in, and Lancelot, Percival and Elaine watch Gwen, filled with pride. And after a long moment passes, The first to step forward is the middle-aged man whose wife Gwen rescued. And then, little by little, almost everyone in the intersection steps forward. The fight in them is stirred, and Gwen nods to the people, grateful. And Lancelot, Elaine and Percival in turn nod to Gwen. He did it. We then go back to Elaine's army, who have made up camp in an open field not far from the beach. And in his tent, we see Mordred run his finger along the toy soldier from Morgana, with a contemplative gaze. After a moment, we then see as he emerges from his tent and walks through the encampment, and he passes enemy soldiers who sit around the campfire to keep warm. But we then see Morgana, as she watches him from inside her own tent, and she sees Mordred stop outside a large tent and face the two enemy guards standing there, and he exchanges some inaudible words with them, and after casting a glance over his shoulder like he knows he's being watched, he slips inside. Morgana then slithers out of her own tent, and avoiding enemy soldiers' gazes, she slips behind the one Mordred has just entered, Elaine's, and crouching low to the ground, she begins to listen. As we then go into Elaine's tent, we see that it's extravagant, enough to match Arthur's. Enormous bed, big sweeping canopy, intricate rugs, and Mordred and Elaine stand in the centre, and by Mordred's stiff countenance, it's clear he's not happy with Elaine. "I don't know what you mean, Mordred," Elaine says. "Don't play coy," Mordred replies. "It doesn't suit you. I need to be sure our expectations are aligned. That Morgana will assume the throne after we've won? You know I only serve the goddess." And Elaine adopts the most innocent expression she can muster. But Mordred is not convinced, and he measures her for a moment, calculating. "What is the circle of fate?" And we then see Elaine's smile hardens. "Circle? Where did you hear such a thing?" "Just answer the question, Elaine. Unless you are hiding something from me." And outside, Morgana waits, listening, hanging on the moment. Her plan to learn the truth about the circle of fate is working. "You do trust me, Elaine? Do you not?" And Elaine's smile then becomes absolutely murderous with rage and discomfort. "Of course, Mordred. Then why do you lie?" And Elaine realises she's been cornered, and now she must confess. And her smile diminishes into utter contempt. "Very well. There is," she begins to say to him, "a reason why you return to life. Why I had Accolon follow you everywhere for your protection. Nothing is of greater importance than what I am about to tell you now." But as we then go to elsewhere in the enemy encampment, we see enemy soldiers cluster around the campfire, warming themselves. But one of the soldiers then glances up and notices a long trail of smoke wafting overhead, and it's too much smoke to be coming from another campfire. "What is that?" he says, and other soldiers then notice the thickening smoke with perplexed stares. And a sharp cry of an enemy soldier then pierces the night, and the soldiers jump to their feet, with their weapons ready, and they see that the smoke arises from somewhere a few tents beyond, and they run to find the source. The soldiers then join their fellows on the scene, and they see that 2 tents are utterly consumed by blazing flames, and the soldiers are baffled. One soldier then turns to another, one who was already here watching the tents burn. "Whose tents were these?" the soldier asks. "They were the tents of Lord Vortigern and Maligent, but the tents are swallowed by fire. There's no way the Lord survived. They're dead." And from the corner of his eye, the soldier then spots Gwen, dashing out from behind the tent where she's been hiding. "You!" he calls out. "Stop!" And Gwen sprints away as the enemy soldiers pursue her. We then go back to Elaine's tent, and Elaine has just finished explaining the circle of fate. "Mordred," she says to him, "do you understand?" But Mordred stands before her, bewildered, dazed with fear and dread at what she has just disclosed. And still crouched outside Elaine's tent, Morgana, who heard their conversation, covers her mouth, with her eyes wide in horror. Whatever she has just learned is devastating, and she falls back and sits, looking scared to death. "You kept this from me," Mordred begins to say, "because you feared what I would do. You knew I would no longer need you." "You do need me, Mordred." "You mean you need me? Without me, all of your work would be for nothing." But an enemy guard then bursts into Elaine's tent. "My lady, the lords have been killed." And outside the tent, Morgana has gotten to her feet, when out of nowhere, Gwen crashes against Morgana and knocks them both to the ground, and Morgana winces up to see Gwen lying on top of her. "You!" And Morgana then shoves her off, and the two sit up. "She went this way!" they hear a soldier call out, and jumping to her feet, Gwen hauls Morgana up and pushes her into a run. "What are you doing here?" Morgana calls out. "Just run," Gwen replies. "Wait, but Mordred is still... I'm not finished here." "You are now," and they weave between tents to avoid the soldiers. "You're destroying my mission," Morgana says. "If not for you, But she doesn't get to finish, because Lady Lordine slides out from behind the tent and into their path, and she fires a flash of red magic. It throws Morgana and Gwen backwards onto the ground, and they groan and struggle to get up. And Lady Lordine nears and looms over them with a malicious smile, hand extended to fire a spell. But Gwen swings her foot at Lady Lordine's legs and kicks them out from under her, and Lady Lordine falls just as Morgana gets to her feet. And Morgana stands over Lady Lordine, who stares up in terror, and Morgana doesn't even lift a finger, and her eyes flashing gold, she uses her magic to snap Lady Lordine's neck. And after hearing another shout from their pursuers, Morgana and Gwen then take off, and they ride Gwen's horse at lightning speed, on the way to Arthur's camp. As we then go back to Arthur, we see he and Merlin come to greet the knights, and the civilians that the knights have brought back with them, and Arthur and Gwen clasp each other's wrists. "I hope this will make up for failing you last time around," Gwen says to Arthur. "You've never failed me, Gwen," Arthur replies. "Not once," and they share smiles, and Arthur then turns to the civilians. "Thank you all for coming," he begins to say. "Elaine, Lancelot and Percival will show you where to stay and go over our battle plans with you. Those who fight will be provided with armour and weapons." But he's then interrupted, as everyone's attention is then drawn to Gwen and Morgana as they gallop into the camp. And Gwen leaps off before the horse has fully halted and runs up to Arthur and Merlin. "Arthur," she begins to say, Elaine's lords and lady have been vanquished. We saw to it personally. And Arthur is clearly stunned. Guinevere, this will help considerably. You're a marvel. And Gwen gives a humble smile. And as Merlin tries to see past the civilians and knights to Morgana, we see Morgana is caught up in her own troubled thoughts as she slowly dismounts. But when she turns and locks eyes with Merlin, both of them are overwhelmed with relief, and they approach each other and meet in an embrace. And Morgana clings to Merlin, traumatized, and her eyes are bright with terror as she stares into nothing. And as Merlin pulls back and sees this, he is immediately worried. Morgana, what is it? And Morgana stares up at him, trying to find the words. I need to tell you something. We then see as Arthur, Merlin and Gwen have gathered in Arthur's tent, and they face Morgana, whose eyes are still filled with fear. There is a reason no one is allowed to kill Merlin or Arthur, Morgana begins to say. A reason so many follow Mordred. A reason Elaine was so terrified when she realised she couldn't save Merlin. And she then takes a deep breath. It started with Arthur's first reign. The coin the Desir gave Arthur represented a curse he sealed when he denied the old religion. And we then see as Arthur remembers this. I cannot do as you ask, Arthur remembers saying to the Desir. You have made your decision, the Desir said to him. Sealed your fate. Farewell, Arthur Pendragon. And we then return to present Arthur. What is the curse? He asks Morgana. The only way to restore balance for all of the sorcerers killed during your reign is through a blood sacrifice. The sacrifice demands that Elaine, as judge, slaughter everyone on Earth, including herself, in reparation for all the blood you've spilt. And they all then take this in. Everyone, Gwen says. What can we do to stop it? Merlin then cuts in. In order to avert such a terrible end, Morgana replies, the goddess created the Circle of Fate, made up of Arthur, Merlin and Mordred. It's called a circle because it's a cycle. Arthur kills Mordred. Mordred kills Arthur. Merlin waits for Arthur. And they come back and start it all over again. When you died, the circle started spinning. Since circles come back around, you and Mordred were both brought back, and the rest of us with you. That's why our present has often paralleled our past. Because of the circle. History wants to repeat itself. And we see Merlin start to piece it together. Right. Like the way Arthur and I met Gwen. Or how Lancelot and Gwen went behind Arthur's back. Or you with the hemlock. And Morgana then nods. And then continues. But the circle stops spinning tomorrow. When the battle starts. The balance demands a sacrifice. Not just a life. The circle can only be broken when one takes the place of another. Meaning what, exactly? Gwen asks her. Either Arthur, Merlin or Mordred must willingly give his life for the other to break the circle, or everyone on Earth will be massacred. And an unspeakable dread overcomes them, and there's a long pause of silence. Then Arthur begins to say, if I die for Merlin, this mass bloodshed will be averted. Arthur, Merlin says, but Morgana cuts him off. No. One must take the place of the other. Even though we're immortal now, neither you nor Mordred could take Merlin's place of waiting, because there would be nothing to wait for. He wouldn't come back to life, because he's never really died. You and Mordred have. If you died for Merlin, the circle would still be unbroken, and Elaine would have to kill us all. So, Gwen begins to ask, what are our options then? And Morgana then pauses before responding. There are only 4 ways to break this circle. Arthur dies for Mordred. Mordred dies for Arthur. Merlin dies for Mordred. Or Merlin dies for Arthur. And the words ring in the air long after they've been spoken, and they contemplate these options. Mordred would never give his life for Arthur, Merlin says. Not now, after everything. And, Gwen cuts in, Arthur is the once and future king. He can't just leave his people again. And as their list of options thins, the only solution rears its ugly head. That leaves me, Merlin says. No, Arthur exclaims. Out of the question. There's another way out of this. I know there is. Arthur, Merlin says to him, the circle has to be broken from within. It demands a sacrifice from one of us 3. If I have to be that sacrifice to prevent worldwide bloodshed, then so be it. Perhaps if we kill Elaine, Gwen then calls out, in a desperate tone. Before any of this can happen, there will be no one left to enact the judgment. Unlikely, Merlin replies. The Desir would simply find someone else to be their judge. No, Arthur says. That could work. This could work. Arthur, Merlin says to him. Kilgara said the Desir are going to kill her anyway for her disobedience. She must not be that valuable. That won't help. No! Don't say anything. We will kill Elaine. And no one has to give their life for anyone. That isn't a sacrifice, Arthur. It won't stop the judgment. It will have to. Because I won't take no for an answer. Arthur! But refusing to hear any more talk of Merlin dying, Arthur exits the tent and leaves the 3 of them alone. And Merlin stares after him. After some time then passes, we see Merlin as he stands on the shoreline, staring over the sea in thought. It will be dawn soon, and he knows what must be done. He must find the strength to see it through. And Morgana then appears beside him, and a silent, despondent moment passes, filled only by the roaring of the wind and waves. It could work, Morgana begins to say, clearly grasping at straws. Maybe killing Elaine really is the answer. If it isn't, Merlin replies, then everything will be for nothing. It will be alright. And Morgana releases a deep sigh. She's distressed, frustrated, angry that he won't admit he's as terrified as she is. He won't even turn his head to the side and look at her. Even if you sacrifice yourself, Morgana continues, who's to say someone won't simply kill Arthur afterwards? I have to trust he'll be protected. If I don't die, everyone Will. Why are you being so calm about all of this? Because I have to. No, Merlin. You don't. You don't have to be the hero every time. I'm not afraid to die. Then why can't you look me in the eye? Because if I see the face of someone I love right now, I might not be able to go through with it. And he tries to contain himself, and Morgana stares at him, but he still won't face her, and the sound of the waves fill the night. And Morgana then remembers what Merlin said to her all those years ago. It doesn't have to be like this. And slowly, she takes his hand. We can find another way. And Merlin closes his tear-filled eyes and threads his fingers through hers, shuddering. You're the one who taught me. There's always a choice, Merlin. And Morgana then leans her forehead against the side of his head. You didn't give up on me, so I'm not giving up on you. And Merlin then eases his head into hers. He needs this comfort. He doesn't think he can manage to lose her after this, but he can't resist it either. And after a moment, Morgana takes a breath and lets go of his hand, and she starts to walk away. And Merlin's eyes open, and his head turns, and he watches her head down the beach. Morgana! Wait! And Merlin takes off after her and clears the distance between them, and he grabs her by the arm and pulls her back around, and kisses her on the lips. No more resistance, and she's taken by surprise, but quickly gives in. Both such ancient souls, the victims of outrageous suffering, now pulled back together, just as they were at the start. So lonely then, so lonely now, that it seems only right to share in one another's brokenness, and hopefully to end it. And after a long moment, they break away, but only by inches. If there's anything I'm never going to do again, Merlin says to her, it's let you walk away from me. And Merlin lifts his hand, and slowly he touches it to her face, and Morgana shivers at the touch, but she doesn't recoil. There is nothing false in it, no desire to manipulate or to use, or to torture, just pure comfort. We then go back to Arthur, who sits alone at a campfire, gazing into the flames which flicker in his eyes, and his worries weigh down on him, and with a silent sigh, he closes his eyes. How is he ever going to solve this? After some time then passes, we see Mordred in his chambers as he suits up for battle, and he unsheaths his dragon-forged sword, and he faces the mirror, and a solemn, determined soldier stares back at him. Today is the day that Arthur Pendragon will pay for his sins. No longer is he unsure of who he is, of what he was born to do. He is the little walking tragedy, a prodigy of regicide. Killing kings is his identity. Killing kings is his destiny. But as he turns to leave, something catches his eye. The toy soldier on his desk, and he stares at it for a moment, quiet, before finally he leaves his tent, and as he leaves the toy soldier behind, it's as if he leaves his conscience, his innocence, and his bond with Morgana. And we then see as Elaine's army is on the move, and they cover vast distance in a short amount of time. And as we then go back to Arthur's army, we see that final preparations for war are made. Swords are sharpened last minute, tents taken down, campfires are being stamped and poured out, and in the tent armoury, all suit up for battle. In the command tent, we see Gwen, the knights, and several other soldiers bend over the map-covered table together, while Merlin, clad in his new armour with the dragon engraved on it, observes from the sidelines, and Arthur then enters and takes his place at the head of the table. "There has been a change in plans," he begins to say. "The knights will focus on taking down Elaine's foot soldiers, while Gwen, Morgana, Merlin and I channel all our attention into dispatching Elaine." "What about Mordred?" Gwen then asks. "Under no circumstances is anyone to kill Mordred," Arthur then says. "Otherwise, the circle of fate will remain unbroken. If you see him, avoid him." And Merlin sighs. He doubts this will make any difference. After a short amount of time then passes, we go to Arthur's tent, and in silence, Merlin and Arthur take turns helping each other into their armour, and Merlin then finishes up with one of Arthur's vambraces, and steps back into his servant stance. "Steps have been taken to ensure our victory," Arthur then says, and Merlin nods softly, before Arthur rests a hand on his shoulder. "As long as we stay together, Merlin, nothing will go wrong." And Merlin glances at Arthur's hand on his shoulder, and he feels it trembling, and realising Merlin has noticed, Arthur quickly withdraws it, and he glances about the tent before he begins to fiddle with his own armour. "You don't have to worry," Merlin says. "I'm not worried. What would make you think that?" "Well, you'd have to be crazy not to be." "Well, then, I must be crazy, because I'm not worried." And he heads to the table and starts to needlessly sort his papers. But Merlin then winces as though in pain, one hand flying to his head, and startled, Arthur whips around to face him. "Merlin, what is it? What's wrong?" And Merlin shakes his head, with his eyes closed, as Arthur approaches. "I'm having a vision." "A vision?" "Yeah. Oh, it's a really powerful one." And the more unsettled noises Merlin makes, the less believable his vision grows, and Arthur relaxes as he realises Merlin is pretending. But Merlin holds up a hand to silence him. "Wait," Merlin then begins to say. I see the throne room back at the sanctuary. It's decorated and just filled with people. There are trumpets blaring." "Merlin," Arthur then says, whilst trying to resist a smile. "Really?" "Wait," Merlin continues. "I see a great ruler taking his place at the front of the room. The people are chanting something. I think it's 'Long live the King.'" And shaking his head, Arthur gives in to a small chuckle. "Oh, now, wait. And the people are bowing. They're honouring their ruler." I get the sense this ruler has just led his people to a great victory. And this is the dawn of a new era. Of peace and light. And Merlin then opens his eyes. And he smiles at Arthur. The people are proud to serve such a man. For no ruler before or after shall ever surpass him in wisdom, fairness and honour. That ruler is you, Arthur. And Arthur regards him fondly, grateful for the encouragement. And where does this vision of yours put you? Arthur then asks, and we see Merlin force a smile. I'll be watching over you, like always. And Arthur smiles at Merlin for a moment. Thank you, Merlin. And Merlin gives a nod, and they hold each other's gazes. Come on, Arthur then says. We need to make sure everything is prepared. And after clapping Merlin on the back, Arthur then exits the tent. And as Merlin comes back down to earth where the probability of his death is still at large, his smile fades. And despite the facade, he is scared to death. But he then follows Arthur. We then see Arthur, the knights, and the rest of Arthur's soldiers ready their horses, and the 4 knights and Gwen prepare near to each other. You know, Percival begins to say, whoever said, you only live once? He lied. Well, Elaine replies, let's just hope you only die once. Well, if Lancelot is any indication, Gwen then cuts in, then I wouldn't count on it. He's died what, 2, 3 times? More like 2.5, Lancelot responds, and the knights chuckle and exchange smirks. Let's leave it at 2.5 then, shall we? Gwen then says, and her and Lancelot then exchange a glance. We then go to Arthur, who has just finished preparing his horse, and he pauses when he notices Morgana and Merlin a few horses off. Don't be a fool out there. Alright, we see Morgana say to Merlin. Stay close to me. I'll watch your back. Good, Merlin replies. Feel free to enjoy the view. And Morgana then whacks him on the arm. I'm serious, Merlin. Some of us still need you. I know. And they stare at each other for a moment. And in unison, they move in for a hug. And out of earshot, Arthur watches them, with a gentle smile on his face. They then ease back just enough to see each other, and after a moment, Morgana kisses Merlin on the lips, long and tender, and possibly their last kiss. And they then break away, and Merlin spares her another lingering glance, before he heads off to prepare his horse. And having seen the kiss, Arthur eyes Merlin, dumbfounded, teasingly quizzical, as Merlin walks past him, and catching his gaze, Merlin gives an innocent shrug, as he continues on his way, and shaking his head with a smirk, Arthur then passes his reins to one of his soldiers, and makes way toward Morgana, who is about to mount her horse. Morgana, he says, and Morgana stops and faces him. I want you to know, if we prevail today, I would be honoured if you would rule alongside me. And Morgana stares at him, totally surprised. What about Gwen? Guinevere feels she has been queen long enough, and Morgana then takes a moment to consider her brother's offer. Thank you, but I don't deserve it. I once thought I could substitute power for love, but now I see love is the only power worth fighting for." And Arthur's clearly astonished, and he takes a moment to take this in. "But how am I to fill 2 thrones? And Morgana then smiles at him. "That's easy. Just put your head in one and your heart in the other. That way you can never go wrong." And they then hold each other's gazes for a moment, and Arthur pulls her into a hug, and Morgana stares in surprise over his shoulder for a moment, stiff, before she relaxes and reciprocates the embrace. "You be careful," Arthur says. "All right, sister? You do the same, brother." And Arthur gives a smile and nod, and he then heads off. We then see a blindfolded Elaine, as she and Mordred then lead the enemy army through the treacherous path to the beach. And as we go back to Arthur's army, we see that they are all in formation. It's an electric mix, containing 1 king, a former queen, 2 sorcerers, Arthur's soldiers and numerous civilians, and they await the enemy army's arrival. And the beach is silent but for the crashing of the waves, and banners fly high in the sea air, and Morgana, Arthur, Merlin and Gwen sit in that order on their horses, and Arthur speaks to Merlin in a low voice. "No sign of that special aid yet?" "It'll come," Merlin replies. "Let's hope so." And for a long, dread-filled moment, all is still. But then, gradually, a low rumbling rises above the sound of the ocean, growing louder, and the ground beneath them trembles. Up ahead in the distance, a line of enemy soldiers appears, and Elaine and Mordred lead their host, neck and neck, and a scowl settles over Mordred's face as he singles out Morgana among their enemies. She betrayed him. He should have known. "There is Morgana," he says. "On the losing side," Elaine replies. "Right where she belongs. Remember, timing is key. Do not strike until you know for certain that Emerus will propel himself between Arthur and the blade. Once Emerus has sacrificed himself and broken the circle, you can deal with Arthur as you wish." And Mordred gives a stiff nod. And as the enemy army marches to its position down the beach, fear sets into Arthur's army from the sheer numbers Elaine commands, and Merlin and Gwen exchange an uneasy glance. And we then see that the enemy army has reached its position, and they stop suddenly, facing their opponents, and the beach grows still once more. And Arthur, Merlin, Gwen and Morgana look at one another before, and in unison, they urge their horses forward, leaving Arthur's army, and Elaine and Mordred do the same. And the representatives from both sides ride out and meet together in the middle, between the 2 armies. It's time for the parley. "Here we are at last," Elaine says. "It felt as though this day would never come." "We can still find a way out of this, Elaine," Arthur then says to her. "Appeal to the desire. Mercy is superior to judgment." "Mercy is not an option," Mordred says to him. "Mordred," Morgana then cuts in. "Please, don't bother, Morgana. You have betrayed me." "Do not worry," Elaine begins to say. "Every last one of you will get only what you deserve." and we see Merlin glares at Elaine. "You know that's not true," he says to her. "It's never been true. You derive pleasure from inflicting pain. You always take it too far." And Elaine turns her blindfold gaze to Merlin with a chilling smile. "Then, you shouldn't have taught me how." And all of them then accept that they will not be able to come to terms. But discreetly directing his horse towards Elaine, while he has the chance, Arthur rips his sword from its sheath and swipes at Elaine's head, but Mordred blocks it with his own sword, glaring at Arthur for breaking one of the rules of war. And Merlin, Morgana and Gwen are all shocked as well, and Mordred wrenches Arthur's sword out of the way with his own, and he and Elaine then turn on their horses and return to their side, and with a last frustrated glance at them, Arthur turns his horse around and leads Merlin, Morgana and Gwen back to his army. As Merlin, Morgana and Gwen then return to their positions, Arthur rides his horse out in front of his army, and begins to bellow at the top of his lungs. "The day of judgment has come," he begins to say. "Time to take death by the horns and say, 'You have no hold over me.' The fate of humanity rests on our shoulders. Now, let's raise some hell!" And the army roars in answer. They're ready to face their foes. And we then see Elaine ride along the first line of her soldiers. "Give no quarter," she calls out. "Remember, no one but Mordred is to lay a finger on Emrys or the king." And we then see Arthur assumes his position at the front of the army, and he raises his sword towards the enemy. "For the love of Albion!" he calls out, and with that, Arthur kicks his horse and gallops forth, leading Morgana, Merlin, Gwen, the knights and all of his army, who are each screaming fierce war cries, and Elaine, Mordred and the enemy army also burst forward, and the two armies stampede towards each other, hooves pound against the sand, and after covering the distance, the sides crash into each other, spears jabbing, banners flying, sword upon sword. The sounds of war fill the beach. We then see as Arthur and Lancelot slash at the enemy soldiers who swarm their horses, but Lancelot is quickly forced off his horse by an enemy soldier, but he quickly gets to his feet and has at their adversaries. And from atop her white horse, we see Elaine as she hacks at Arthur's soldiers with her triple-bladed axe. "Merlin!" Morgana calls out over the roar of the battle, and after deflecting a blow with a blast of blue magic that sends enemy soldiers flying, Merlin scans through the fray until he locks eyes with Morgana. "Cover me!" she says to him, and gripping sword and reins, Morgana turns her horse and charges head on deeper into the enemy side, and Merlin follows her, blasting spell after spell at those who pursue her. One of Arthur's soldiers then runs at Mordred, screaming with his sword raised, but backing his horse out of the way, Mordred uses magic to wrest the soldier's sword from his grasp, and he levitates it for a moment, before thrusting it into his adversary. As Arthur then cuts down another enemy soldier, he looks up, scanning the chaos around them. "I can't see Merlin or Morgana," he says to Gwen, and the two of them exchange distressed glances. Gwen and Elaine then steer their horses around Lancelot and Percival, who have both ended up on the sand, and the four of them continue to fight off enemy soldiers. As we then go back to Merlin, we see him follow Morgana deep into the enemy army, holding off everyone who tries to interfere. And when Morgana has reached her destination, right in the middle of the enemy army, she pulls her horse to a stop and raises both hands to the sky. And we see Merlin shoot a ray of scorching light at an enemy soldier who attempted to slash at her. And Morgana raises her head, eyes flashing gold. We then see Arthur's soldiers, enemy soldiers, Gwen and Percival, look up to see what appears to be distant stars plummeting toward the earth at high speed. And Morgana keeps reaching for the heavens, and as the stars fall faster and faster, Merlin squints up, and his eyes widen as he realises what those falling objects are. And he throws an incredulous glance at Morgana. "You might want to run," Morgana says to him. "I'm not going anywhere," Merlin replies, and with her hands still raised, Morgana clenches them into fists, and at the last second, Merlin throws a magic shield over the two of them, and those on the battlefield only have a moment's warning before they are caught in the rain of burning skull-sized meteorites. We then see a meteorite hits Mordred's horse and knocks him off, and a pair of enemy soldiers sees this and, avoiding the deadly meteor shower, scrambles to help him up. After all, without him to break the circle, they will all die. And Mordred yanks his arm from their grasp, outraged, and he raises a hand and shoots up a broad shield of purple magic that covers him and all the enemy soldiers nearby, protecting them from Morgana's meteor shower. And now on foot, we then see Elaine, who finds herself in the thick of the crowd of Arthur's soldiers, who come at her from every angle, and lifting her axe as though it was a staff, she summons a gust of white energy and blasts her enemies several yards away, clearing up a large circle of ground around her that is quickly evaded by more of Arthur's soldiers. And from where he fights, still atop his horse, Arthur sees Elaine's blast of white magic and knows where she must be, and he throws a glance at Gwen. "I found Elaine," he says, and Arthur charges in the direction of Elaine, but Gwen is the only one who sees an enemy soldier, who comes straight for Arthur with a mace. "Arthur!" she calls out. "Look out!" But the enemy soldier slams his mace into the leg of Arthur's horse, and braying with pain, the horse crumples to the ground, rolling on top of Arthur's leg, and Gwen watches in horror. She leaps down from her own horse and runs into the enemy soldier who wields the mace, and she cuts him down. She then stoops to help push the horse off of Arthur, but she finds she's not strong enough alone. But out of nowhere, Lancelot, Gwen and Percival join her, and they lend their strength, and altogether they free Arthur's leg, while Elaine holds off the enemy soldiers. Percival then helps Arthur to his feet, and an enemy soldier raises his sword to strike Gwen, but Elaine kicks his feet from under him. We then go back to Merlin, and we see an enemy soldier try to jab at him with a long, menacing spear, but Merlin breathes blue fire onto his sword and plunges it into the enemy soldier. And pulling a handful of black powder from her pocket, we see Morgana blow the powder into the air, and the powder takes on the shapes of many screeching ravens who fly at the enemy soldiers, clawing and pecking at their faces. But out of nowhere, Mordred then seizes Morgana's wrist and yanks her off her horse, and she tumbles to the sand, and rolling over, she stares up into his scarred face in fear as he raises his sword. "Mordred," she says, shaking her head. "Please, don't!" And though his sword is at the ready, Mordred hesitates. just long enough for Merlin to fire a blast of magic light straight for him. But sensing the air rushing toward him, Mordred bends backward and narrowly avoids Merlin's blast of magic. "Careful, Merlin," Morgana says to him whilst getting up. "Don't kill him. Remember the circle." Mordred then whips around and raises his enchanted sword to Merlin, who sits atop his horse, pressing it against his neck. "Where is Arthur?" Mordred says. "We cannot end this without him." But with his eyes flashing gold, Merlin uses magic to push Mordred's blade away, and Merlin grabs Morgana by the hand and pulls her up onto his horse, and they kick off, back for their own side, with Mordred helpless to stop them. He can't kill Merlin, unless he's taking the blade for Arthur. And as Merlin and Morgana hasten to get back to their friends, an enemy soldier throws a spear into Merlin's horse, and the horse rears up in pain, knocking both Merlin and Morgana off its back and onto the sand, and Merlin rolls off into the surf of the sea, where he lays, unconscious. We then see Elaine, as she throws down another of Arthur's soldiers, and hacks at him. "Elaine!" And Elaine then turns her blindfolded gaze, and Arthur stands a few paces off, looking so ready to kill her. "This again," Elaine says with an irritated sigh. "I will not let Merlin's blood be the price for my mistakes," Arthur says whilst advancing near to her. "Hopefully, the goddess will be satisfied with yours." And Arthur raises his sword, the one with the missing shard, and swipes at her head, and Elaine deflects the blow with her axe, and their former dance of one-sided combat begins. We then see the side of Merlin's face, where he lies in the surf, slowly coming to, and he stares ahead at the rolling waves of the sea, and the waves come in, sloshing against his face, over which a frown forms as he gazes ahead at the ocean, and a sudden realization hits him, and he remembers what Kilgara said. If you are to fulfill your destiny once and for all, you and Arthur must make your last stand by the sea, for there you shall receive special aid. And struggling, Merlin then pushes himself onto all fours. He's got to get up. He's got to. You are the last Dragon Lord now, he suddenly remembers his father saying. You alone carry the ancient gift. And Merlin gets to his feet, unsteady, and faces the sea. For you are the son of the earth, the sea, the sky. Earth because of the magic you possess. Sea because of the power you wield. And sky because of the dragons you command. And Merlin knows what he must do, and closing his eyes, Merlin bellows in the ancient Dragon Lord tongue. Drakos tu vifu, he begins to say. Rally ston kiliosas. Si diatoso namas. Expriti si. Si afton tu palemor. Elati si. Voifie mas. Torah. And when Merlin opens his eyes, we don't see them flash gold. For this time, they have taken on the serpentine eyes of a dragon. And the ocean's waves build, moving faster and stronger, climbing higher. And Merlin waits on the edge of the sea, scanning the waters, which begin to churn. Something below the surface disturbs them, and soldiers from both sides look out and see the sudden violence of the sea, and Merlin watches the waves topple over each other, massing and heightening, and then the waves shrink suddenly and become almost as small as ripples, and he waits. And water then suddenly shoots up as something massive bursts into the air, emerging from the sea, and iridescent scales of blue and viridian, and jagged thorns down the spine of the snake-like body, and those on land gape up in terror, as an enormous sea dragon rears its head, and gives a thunderous roar. And Merlin smiles. Here is the aid they were promised. There is a new dragon at his command. And we then see as Elaine and Arthur freeze mid-combat, staring in awe at the wondrous sea dragon, and Morgana's mouth drops open for fear and amazement, and Gwen and the knights marvel at the creature in terror, and even Mordred stops for a moment, shocked, but refusing to fail his task. Arthur shakes it off and resumes his relentless attack on Elaine, who still deflects his every blow. And after finally finding him, we see Morgana run up to Merlin's side. "What is that?" she asks him. "A sea dragon." And at those words, the sea dragon spreads its gigantic, previously unseen wings, and it flings water across the battlefield like a heavy rain. And there are little points of light on the tips of its wings, and running down its nose and spine, they flash to life. And the sea dragon's wings cut through the air, and lift it up out from the water, and as it flies, eclipsing the sun, ocean water rains from its wings down over the battlefield, and the sea dragon opens its mouth and releases a long stream of fire at the enemy soldiers, and the soldiers scramble about in terror. And we see as Arthur throws blow after blow at Elaine. It's clearly getting tiring for her to defend herself against a man she's forbidden to kill, especially with Arthur's soldiers repeatedly attacking her. The sea dragon then swoops in low over the battlefield, raking its claws through the rows of enemy soldiers and slicing them. And we see Elaine defeats another enemy soldier, but he looks up to see Mordred standing before him, his face the image of pure hatred. And for a moment, they both stare at one another, but Mordred then starts towards him, and swings his sword, but it collides with Percival's blade, rather than Elaine's head. "Fancy meeting you here," Percival says to him, but furious, Mordred wrenches Percival's blade out of the way. "If you know anything about the Circle of Fate, then you know it would be suicide to kill me." And Elaine and Percival exchange a glance at that. And we then see Gwen, as she slashes an enemy soldier across the chest, and she looks up to see Mordred advancing on Elaine and Percival. "I, however," Mordred continues, in a raging tone, "am not at all hindered from killing traitors like you." And as Mordred raises his weapon with both hands, Gwen appears from behind him and slices across his arm with her sword. And releasing a shout of pain, Mordred lowers his sword. "Move!" Gwen calls out, and she ushers Elaine and Percival forward, and they seize the opportunity and escape from Mordred into the turmoil. And Mordred glances about, searching for them, burning with fury, as he holds his wounded arm. We then go to Gwen, who we see knock an enemy soldier off his horse. Less than 2 seconds have passed before the sea dragon, flying low, passes through, and it picks up an enemy soldier's horse and carries it away. And Gwen throws an incredulous glance at Lancelot, who follows the sea dragon's path with his eyes, smiling. "Let me guess," Gwen begins to say. Another one of Merlin's lizards? Most likely, Lancelot replies. As we then go back to Arthur, we see that he's infuriated that Elaine will not fight him back. "Why are you even here? If you refuse to fight me," Arthur calls out. "Mordred could have led this battle himself." "Mordred is too weak to succeed on his own," Elaine replies. "I've come to ensure he doesn't fail, and when every Pendragon is finally dead, there will be no one with more right to the throne than me." "Do the Desir know of these ambitions?" Arthur then asks her. "The Desir cannot see as much as they profess," and Arthur pants with exhaustion, but he takes a moment to collect himself. "You really think they don't know your heart after all this time? You're deceiving yourself." And provoked, Elaine slashes at his arm, but he lunges back, encouraged. "Elaine, Merlin had a vision from the great dragon whilst he was dying. Once the battle is over, no matter the outcome, the Desir will execute you for your offences. You will die, whether the circle is broken or not." And Elaine freezes, and though Arthur cannot see her eyes through the blindfold, he is sure his words have delivered a deeper blow than his sword ever would. We then go back to the sea dragon, as it lands on the beach where Merlin and Morgana have been fighting, and it lowers its head in bow to Merlin, and Merlin bows in return. He then snatches Morgana's wrist and drags her towards the sea dragon. "We need to find Arthur," he says to her, and he climbs on the sea dragon's back, and then yanks Morgana up behind him. "When was the last time you rode a dragon?" Morgana says, and Merlin smirks. "Only 1,000 years ago." And Morgana only has a split second to look immensely uncomfortable, before the sea dragon then takes flight, and she grasps at Merlin for dear life. We then go back to Arthur, who continues to talk to Elaine. "After all you've done to ensure victory," he says to her, "no matter who wins this battle, you will lose everything. Why should I believe you? Put it together, Elaine. You know about Merlin's visions. You were his student, his apprentice. He taught you everything he knows. No! The Desir don't need a servant as self-serving as you. Only the perfect are worthy of casting judgment. And you are the farthest thing from it." And Elaine then rips off her blindfold, and tears of hate and devastation stream from her eyes. And she swings her axe at Arthur, but this time, Arthur's the one that deflects the blow. And from the back of the sea dragon, where Merlin and Morgana ride as the creature soars through the air, Merlin spots Elaine and Arthur locked in combat below. "I see him! Now we just..." But he's cut off when an invisible force of magic lifts him off the sea dragon. "Merlin!" Morgana calls out, and Merlin is roughly levitated from the sea dragon and pulled back to the earth, and he slams against the sand. And we then see Mordred stand over him, with his tearful eyes that are finishing their flash of gold from the magic he used to levitate Merlin. "Get up," Mordred then says to him. "You know what needs to be done. I don't want this any more than you." And with great pain, Merlin then gets his feet under him, and laying hold of him by the arm, Mordred drags him along, using his other hand to magically force a path through the battlefield. And we see that Arthur and Elaine's fight is undisturbed by the surrounding soldiers. Though the majority still fights, a circle of soldiers from both sides of the battle has formed around the king and the judge. And from outside the circle, Gwen and Lancelot watch Arthur and Elaine, and Lancelot assesses the enemy soldiers surrounding them with a frown. "Why aren't the soldiers fighting?" Lancelot asks, If the circle isn't broken, Gwen replies, nothing we will do will matter. They will all be massacred. This is no longer a war for prejudice and power. It's a war for humanity's very existence. And Mordred continues to pull Merlin along through the path he has created in the battlefield, heading for Arthur and Elaine, and Merlin lets Mordred yank him. He knows what must be done. If you don't want this, Mordred, Merlin then says to him, then why can't we look for a way out? Don't you understand? Mordred replies, there is no way out. We're damned. The goddess has given us no second chance. Just like your precious king gave none to Kara. Arthur did give Kara a second chance, Mordred. She rejected it. And Mordred then freezes, just as they reach Arthur and Elaine. What? You're lying. No, Merlin begins to say. For once in my life, I'm telling the truth. Before her execution, Arthur gave her the choice between freedom and death. And she chose death. No, Mordred says in a soft tone to himself. Why would she reject? But she said... She told me. She lied to me. And Mordred never knew of this. He thought Arthur had simply sentenced her to death without a chance for redemption. And we then see as Elaine manages to disarm Arthur, and she raises her axe to finish him off, when Arthur's startled gaze over her shoulder causes her to stop, and she spins around to see that Merlin and Mordred have arrived, and at the sight of them, Elaine pauses, and Arthur is filled with dread. And Merlin watches Mordred's look of betrayal as he takes in this horrible revelation. Kara deceived him. She lied to fuel his hatred. Kara rejected it, Mordred, Merlin says to him. She chose vengeance over mercy. And we then see that more of the soldiers have stopped, and Morgana and the knights appear on the edge of the circle, watching in fear and uncertainty. And breaking from his stupor, Mordred heaves Merlin into the circle. Merlin! Mordred! Morgana calls out, and she runs forward, but Elaine casts an invisible force field around the circle to keep anyone from getting in the way, and the force field repels Morgana. And Elaine has her axe at the ready and her hand raised, poised to shoot a spell at Arthur if he attempts to move. He's completely trapped. Merlin! Go! Arthur calls out. Get out of here! But Merlin ignores him. He can't look at Arthur. He won't. It's just too hard enough as it is. Don't you dare jump, Merlin! Arthur exclaims. Don't you dare! And with his blade drawn, Mordred slowly steps forward and stands before Arthur. Mordred! Morgana calls out. Please! I'm begging you! But from Mordred's left, Merlin is prepared to do what is necessary. He's prepared to dive between Arthur and the blade. And from Mordred's right, Elaine waits impatiently for Arthur's death. But she hardly cares how it happens now, if she is going to die anyway. And Mordred stares Arthur down, and Arthur's pleading eyes bounce from Merlin to Mordred. And those all around watch, as Morgana, Gwen, and the knights are all powerless to stop what's coming. We must get in there, Lancelot says. How? Elaine replies. Elaine's shield prevents it, Gwen says. But we can hardly stand here and let Merlin die, Gwen calls out. "Don't do this, Merlin!" Percival shouts out to him, and terrified, Morgana and Gwen take each other's hands, and Mordred exchanges a glance with Merlin, and Arthur watches, helpless, unable to intervene. "I'm ready," Merlin says to Mordred. "Merlin! No!" Arthur calls out. "Just kill him already!" Elaine then screams at Mordred. And here goes. Mordred pulls back his sword, aiming for Arthur's heart, and Merlin is ready to jump. But Mordred does not strike. His hands shake. He can't do it. "Fine," Elaine then says, disgusted. "I'll do it myself." And Elaine casts down her axe and wrests Mordred's sword from his grasp, and Elaine lunges at Arthur, and Merlin dives forward to lay down his life. "No!" This is the end. But Mordred purposely spins into Elaine's path and takes the blow instead of Merlin, and he is impaled by his own former sword, and Morgana screams, and all those watching are absolutely shocked, and Mordred shudders, staring into Elaine's eyes in defiance, and Elaine is startled to see him on the end of the blade, but she quickly recovers and tears the sword from his chest, throwing him aside, and he rolls across the sand. "Mordred!" Morgana screams. But Elaine then turns on Arthur, who is stunned and speechless by what Mordred has done, and she tries to slash at him, but Merlin uses magic to thrust Elaine onto her back, and another spell to roll her onto her stomach and pin her there. And Arthur takes up the fallen triple-bladed axe and towers over her, and Elaine's eyes expand in sheer terror, as Arthur raises the axe and plunges it, severing Elaine's head, as is fitting for any formal execution, sentenced by a real judge, and the axe hits the blood-stained sand, and all is silent. And after a moment, we hear wings flapping, and the sea dragon flies overhead, wings kicking up a gust of wind. Its task of aiding Merlin is finished, and now it makes its way home, and the sea dragon glides out into the water, and returns from whence it came. And with Elaine vanquished, her force field flickers and is broken, and Morgana bursts forward. "Mordred!" she says, as she falls to her knees beside him and turns him over, and he gasps, and she carefully puts his head into her lap, and blood seeps through the wound on his chest, and she presses a hand to his wound. And Merlin, Arthur, Gwen, the knights and the soldiers then gather round, watching in awed bewilderment. "The circle is broken," Mordred then whispers, and speechless, Arthur and Merlin kneel on either side of Mordred. And by now, almost every soldier has ceased combat, and they crowd around in confusion to see the fallen leaders. Arthur begins to say. "I don't understand, Mordred. Why?" "Arthur," Mordred replies, "promise me something. Promise me my people will never again be persecuted for who they are. Promise me that." And Arthur stares at Mordred, astounded, and he puts a hand on his shoulder. "I swear on my life." And Mordred then relaxes a bit, shuddering, as every one of his breaths takes great effort. And Merlin watches him, baffled, and Mordred gasps at the pain. Merlin then sets a steadying hand on Mordred's arm. This druid, whose life he once saved, and later sought to destroy. "Mordred," Merlin says to him, "why did you take my place? What changed your mind?" "You changed. Morgana. Arthur too. I didn't want to waste my second chance. Like Kara." And with his eyes running with tears, Mordred tries to shake his head. "Forgive me." "No, Mordred," Arthur replies whilst fighting his own tears. "Forgive me." And Mordred exerts a small smile at Arthur, and his eyes dimly wander to Morgana's, and raising a quivering hand, he weakly brushes her wet cheek. And then his hand falls, and the ghost of his smile still remains, as he lets go of his last breath. "Mordred! Mordred! No!" Morgana says. "No!" And Morgana bows over him, shaking her head, and tears run down her cheeks as she strokes his scarred but peaceful face. And Merlin and Arthur look on, stunned and emotional. And Gwen, the knights and the soldiers are all baffled by Mordred's sacrifice, unsure whether they should resume battle or not. And breathing heavily, little by little Morgana lifts her head, and her eyes scan the soldiers from both sides of the war. Her grief is now mingled with burning determination, and with the fury of a mother who has just lost a second son. She rises, allowing Merlin to take her place in holding Mordred. "Listen to me," she calls out to the armies. "All of you!" And still reeling, all pull their gazes from Mordred and look at Morgana, as she marches towards the centre of the circle the soldiers have formed. And Arthur and Merlin remain with Mordred, their wondering tear-filled eyes following Morgana, as she continues to shout to the armies. "When did war become the only way to achieve peace? When did death become the only way to ensure life? Look at the devastation we've caused in our pursuit of peace. Do you even know what you're fighting for? Because I have fought on both sides, and I can tell you every man here is fighting for the same thing: to be free." And they all listen, taking in her words. "For centuries, men have longed for a land of peace. Somehow they came to the belief that conflict is the way to reach it. But this cannot last. We need a true leader, someone who will treat us as equals, someone who will judge us based on who we are, not who we were, someone who will bring about this kingdom of the peace men have long dreamt of. And if this man," she then continues as she points to Arthur, "if this king can lead us there, then I say we stand at his side. And let this kingdom come." And Morgana's words ring out across the battlefield. And moved, an enemy soldier, whose head bleeds from an injury, releases his weapon in surrender, utterly drained from the war. And inspired by this, one of Arthur's soldiers does the same, and lets his sword fall. And this causes a chain reaction, until soldiers from both sides are casting down their weapons, the desire to fight wrung from them, and Merlin and Arthur watch in astonishment at the thickening piles of weapons in the sand. And Morgana is equally astounded by the effect her words have had. And Elaine then looks to Gwen, and she steps forward and drops her weapon, and Elaine follow suit, and then the rest of the knights. "Now," Morgana continues, "who among you will take the first step toward reparation?" And we then see Merlin, as he gently closes Mordred's eyes, and passing a hand over his face, he uses magic to heal the burn scars he gave him, and they fade and vanish, leaving Mordred looking like himself at last. And as he and Arthur hoist Mordred up, Gwen and the knights come forward to assist them, and one of Arthur's soldiers breaks away from the two armies, followed by soldiers from both sides, and they all gather around Mordred's body and help to lift it up. And with Mordred now raised above their heads, the two united armies carry him forward, with Morgana trailing behind them. Today, mercy has triumphed over judgment. After months of political debate and controversy, it was finally accepted by all and established that Arthur is the once and future king and heir to the throne of Albion, the United Kingdoms. We then go to the sanctuary, in the hallway to the throne room, and we see Merlin, who is dressed in robes that look remarkably similar to those he once wore during his days as court magician of Camelot, and he tugs at them while he walks, frustrated and itchy. And as he heads down the hall, subjects pass him, each of them dressed in medieval attire, and they hurry on their way, and Gwen happens to be among those passing him, clad in his finest uniform as a knight of Albion, and on his arm is the woman from the nightclub who was gambling with him, Donna, who is now dressed like a medieval lady. And as the pair go by, Gwen smirks at Merlin, and he claps him on the back. "Nice dress, Merlin." And glaring as Gwen and Donna hasten off with the last of the subjects passing through the hall, Merlin starts fidgeting with his robes all the more. "Are you having some trouble there?" And looking over his shoulder, Merlin sees Morgana, looking as striking as ever, with her styled hair and gorgeous gown, and she has an amused half smile on her face. "It's these confounded robes," Merlin replies. "I don't know why Arthur insisted I wear them. I look like an imbecile." And Morgana eyes him up and down. I don't know. I think they make you look rather fetching." And we see Merlin's face blanks. "Come on," Morgana says to him. "We'll be late." And Morgana then passes him, and disappears around the corner with a sexy swish of her gown. And Merlin glances down at his clothes, and he looks up, twitching his eyebrows. Maybe these robes aren't so bad after all. We then see as Morgana joins Gwen, Lancelot, Percival and Elaine, who are the only ones left outside the doors to the throne room, and the knights chatter with excitement. "I still can't believe this day has come," Elaine says. "After all this time." "Well," Gwen replies, "we all know how Arthur likes to keep people waiting. But this day was worth the wait," Percival then says. "Arthur's reign will be the dawn of a new era. An era where the past and the present are one. Magic will be spread freely throughout the world, and all the nations of the earth will finally know peace." Merlin then approaches Morgana and touches her arm, and she gives him a kiss on the cheek, and Merlin quickly turns away, hiding his blushing face. We then see Lancelot, whose gaze is drawn away as Gwen glides down the hall, looking radiant in her new gown, and he breaks away from the others, positively enchanted by her. "You look beautiful, my queen," he says to her. "It's just lady now, actually," Gwen says with a flattered smile. "I'm no longer a queen." But Lancelot shakes his head, and he takes her hand. "You will always be a queen to me. Once," and he presses a kiss to her hand, "and future." And now Gwen is the enchanted one, and speechless. She can do nothing but smile. "Is everything in order?" And they all fall silent, as Arthur now stands before them, clad in regal robes. No more need for armour or chainmail. He wears a cape of velvet, lined with fur draped about his shoulders. But no crown. Not yet. And upon seeing him, Merlin, Morgana, Gwen, and the 4 knights all bow. "It is now, sire," Morgana says to him. "Then you all had better quiet down," Arthur says, and the 4 knights then adopt their proper formation, 2 pairs, and they are the first to stand before the doors, followed by Morgana and Gwen, who stand side by side, and then Arthur and Merlin right behind them, and they all wait a moment, until the doors then open, and light floods the hall, and the 4 knights enter, Lancelot and Gwen side by side, followed by Percival and Elaine, and the 4 then walk down the aisle, flanked by 2 long rows of subjects, and from the lofts, servants sprinkle rose petals over the people, and banners hang from the poles extending from the walls, and the knights make their way to the front of the room where they separate, 2 to each side, and they take their places at the front of the crowds. The next to enter are Morgana and Gwen, and they have beaming smiles on their faces, basking in the glory of the moment, and together they cross the aisle and then separate and take their places, Gwen to the side with Lancelot and Percival, and Morgana to the side with Gwen and Elaine. And in the hall, Arthur and Merlin are the last 2 left, and before they enter, Arthur turns to Merlin. "Try not to cry, now. You too." But their smiles then turn serious. "Did you really mean it?" Arthur begins to say, "when you said you would have waited 1,000,000 years more for me?" "I still do," Merlin replies, as he nods his head. "I would have waited for you too." "I know." And Arthur then faces ahead, and he inhales deeply. He's so ready for this moment. "Your kingdom awaits, sire." And Arthur exhales, and standing tall, he leads the way into the throne room, with Merlin faithfully trailing behind, and both are met with a wave of bows as they pass, and the 2 then clear the long walk, where Merlin parts from Arthur, and walks up the short flight of steps which lead to the throne, and Arthur kneels down upon the steps, and a bishop comes forward, and with Merlin now standing beside him, Merlin bears a pillow upon which rests a magnificent jewelled crown, glinting in the sunlight that pours in through the windows. "Will you," the bishop begins to say, "Arthur Pendragon, solemnly swear to govern, guide, and protect the people of Albion?" "I solemnly swear to do so," Arthur replies. "Will you, to your power, exercise justice and mercy in all your judgments?" "I will." And Arthur meets Merlin's eyes. They are so ready for this moment. And on one side of the aisle, Gwen, Lancelot and Percival beam at Arthur, and on the other, Morgana, Gwen and Elaine do the same. and the bishop then turns and takes the crown between both hands, and lifts it over Arthur's head. Then, by the power vested in me, I crown you, Arthur Pendragon, and he then places the crown upon Arthur's head, King of Albion. And with one last smile at Merlin, Arthur rises and faces the crowd, which roars with praise, and the king stands before them, basking in this long-awaited moment. And the people are cheering, the rose petals are falling. It's a moment of big joy at this magnificent event. This is the dawn of Albion, and we get to see it. And after a long, exciting moment, Arthur then raises his hands, and when the racket dies down, he begins to speak. "Thank you," he begins to say. "Thank you all. To those who have come to share in this wondrous day, and to those who smile down on us from above. To King Leon, Sir Galahad, to Sir Mordred, without whom none of us would be here right now. There is no victory without loss, but not one of these losses has been in vain. I can never express the depth of my gratitude for the sacrifices that have brought us to this moment. And that being said, my first action as king is to honour someone who has sacrificed for me in ways no one else has." And Arthur then turns toward Merlin, who is grinning obliviously. He's too caught up in this glorious moment to notice. Merlin then glances at Arthur, and then out into the crowd, and it hits him. He's the centre of attention, and Merlin's smile vanishes. He has no idea what this means. "Come, Merlin." And after a moment of bewilderment, Merlin then comes to stand before the king, and he faces him down on the steps. "Kneel," Arthur says, and Merlin obeys, but he still has no idea what is going on. But who is he to intrude on Arthur's moment of glory? "I thought long and hard about the appropriate title to bestow upon you," Arthur begins to say. "It wasn't easy, considering all you've meant to me. You anguished over having not saved me from death once, but the truth is, you already saved me long before then." And a servant then comes to stand at Arthur's side, holding another pillow. But from Merlin's position, he cannot see what rests on it. And Arthur smiles down at him. "For your centuries of service to the kingdom, and to your king, as servant, sorcerer, advisor, protector, and friend, and for venturing far above and beyond the line of duty in all of these." And turning, Arthur raises from the pillow a golden chain of office, and he holds it into view, and the medallion bears the golden dragon of the Pendragon crest. "I bid you rise, Merlin Emrys Ambrosius." And Arthur then lifts the chain of office and drapes it over Merlin's head. "Kingmaker of Albion." And the crowd goes insane with cheer and praise, and Merlin is speechless, breathless, and he stares down at the dragon medallion hanging from the chain of office. "Rise, Merlin," Arthur says, and Merlin starts, still stunned, and he rights himself and turns into the light of the windows to face the crowd as they cheer. and Arthur steps back to give him the moment. Rise and shine. And the crowd continues to roar, and Gwen, Elaine, Lancelot, Percival, Gwen and Morgana all beam at Merlin, some with tears glistening in their eyes. They know Merlin deserves this. He more than deserves this, and Merlin is utterly blown away. This is it. The culmination of all his years of toil, of loneliness, of endless loyalty and devotion. It's done. He has fought the good fight, and now he has his eternal reward. And Merlin finds himself standing before an entire kingdom, his people, his friends, his family. And as he takes this in, the memory of the 1500 years of grief, of pain, and of solitude seem like no more than a distant dream. He's done it. He's won. After some time then passes, we go to the banquet hall, and we see that the hall is immensely decorated, and servants bustle to and fro carrying trays of food, and the room is filled with excited chatter. We then see numerous subjects are seated at the table, and Gwen, Lancelot, Percival and Elaine sit beside each other, laughing uproariously, and Gwen has his arm around Donna. We then see Merlin, as he passes alongside the table with a tray of food, but he comes to an abrupt stop when he almost crashes into Arthur, whose arms are crossed in disapproval, and Arthur takes the tray from Merlin and sets it aside on the table. No more serving for Merlin. Well, at least not for tonight. And Arthur then pulls out a chair for him and forces him into it, and he takes his seat at Merlin's left. And in the chair to Merlin's right, Morgana gives Merlin an amused look, and Merlin shrugs in response. We then see Merlin leaning close to Morgana, and he whispers something, and it draws a genuine beautiful laugh out of her, and a big sunny grin from Merlin. He's delighted. And we then see Gwen, as she steals a grape from Lancelot's plate and pops it into her mouth, and Lancelot turns to her, feigning outrage, but Gwen answers with a playful grin. Gwen, Percival and Elaine then clink their glasses together and drink, and all those around the table begin to do the same, and Arthur lifts his glass to his friends, smiling. We then see Merlin and Arthur stand side by side at the railing of the balcony, gazing out, and torches light the kingdom below, and a soft breeze nips at their hair and regal attire, as they absorb the beauty of the night. And they glance at one another and smile, two soldiers, two friends, who have conquered death and more together. In this moment, no words are needed to express all they feel. And from the corner of his eye, Merlin looks at Arthur slyly, and he gives him a gentle nudge with his elbow, and Arthur gives him a look, and nudges him back, and both produce a soft chuckle. And they stand there, smiling, at peace. And then we see the starry night sky, and we see the magical constellation of the scales of justice. And at last, the scales of justice are in perfect balance. At last, the trial is over. The time of Albion has come. In a land of myth and a time of magic, the destiny of a great kingdom has finally been fulfilled. a destiny that concerned King Arthur, court advisor Guinevere, court magician Morgana, King Leon, Sir Mordred, Sir Galahad, the Knights of the Round Table, and most of all, the Kingmaker, who in time grew to father a legend. His name? Merlin.
For you I'd